Hi, everybody. It's Barb Egan with Therapy Talks. And on today's show, we have Bethany MacGillivray, who's a registered clinical counselor from Port Moody, British Columbia. And she is a professional art therapist who also specializes in disordered eating, body image, and using somatic techniques to connect the mind and body. Well, Bethany, thank you for joining us today. And can you tell us a little bit about where you're from, what you like to do, areas of therapy you work in, and just a little bit about you?
Absolutely. Well, as I said, I'm like really excited to be here. I'm very honored with this experience. My name is Bethany MacGillivray, and I am a registered counselor and art therapist in Port Moody, British Columbia, which is just outside of Vancouver, BC. So I'm in the Lower Mainland area. And I have a private practice here. I practice online and in person in this space. And I actually also have a martial arts studio with my husband in the
Cool.
space next to us. So we have, a beautiful Gracie Jiu Jitsu gym here as well. So it's kind of neat to be able to do both of those things in this space and being able to empower people in this moment together. From
Oh,
practice,
awesome.
yeah, for my practice, I specialize or work mostly with body image, embodiment, disordered eating, anxiety, and just really looking within the space of individuals who are looking to connect with themselves and just get into that deeper level of understanding, knowing when you're in that moment of just connection.
Yeah. Wow. Such important topics. I'm so excited to have someone share on that today. So thank you. And to have a fellow British Columbian therapist on. We have so
Oh,
many American, and I'm American, but I am in BC now. And I was in Vancouver for years. I'm in Kelowna, so not too far away from you now.
yeah.
So that's so exciting. That's really awesome.
The power of connection online. It's just
Right?
so such a fantastic thing of just being able to do these things together and to learn and grow and just continue to build. It's really cool.
Definitely. And I bet we'll get into it, but I just want to highlight how awesome it is that, some of the areas that you work in, say anxiety, body image, disordered eating, and a jujitsu studio, martial arts
Yeah.
studio that you're involved into. I'm excited to hear about that because my background is a hockey player, really elite level athlete and coach professionally. But honestly, the hardest thing I ever did was martial arts when I was like 8 years old. My dad was a sports team doctor. I come from like a huge athletic family. And he worked on a guy who had fought Chuck Norris. That was like his claim to fame. And he's like, okay, he did his ankle surgery or something, probably because Chuck Norris smashed it. and so he had this gym, a martial arts gym. And so as a thank you, he was like, hey, your daughter can come and take karate lessons. And it was so scary. It was like me and like all these like big older men. And I was like 8 years old. And I can still smell the smell of it, like the menthol smell and the mats. And it was like, but that's the first experience of mental toughness that I go back to actually when I speak. Because if I made it through all my lessons, I got to go to a Spice Girls concert. And that to this day is one of my favorite concerts ever. And I was so proud of myself.
That's fantastic. Yeah, those things
Oh,
connected, right? Of like going through that, the mental
yeah.
toughness and that
Oh,
goal oriented, getting to that
yes.
space.
The
I,
discipline. Yeah. But even now as an adult, there's been many times where I'm like, I would like to go back because I've heard so many good things about it. Or I work with clients who really find jujitsu really powerful for them, even if it's like self defense or very empowering. And I just I think I'd have such a greater appreciation for that now. And so I'm really excited to hear about that as well.
oh yeah, absolutely. It's such a beautiful connection. And again, because so much of it is to do with the body and movement. And with jujitsu, it's about being close sometimes and being in that space where you're in those uncomfortable positions and how to get out of them safely or how to get into that space and to move your body in ways and using leverage and momentum. And as well, it started with being for people that were smaller and considered more weak, in those spaces. And so it's kind of this martial art that developed to really be embodying of that self-defense place.
Oh, and I love how empowering it is too. And awareness, like body space and awareness. And yeah.
Yeah, being in those moments and connection. And it's been a pretty fantastic journey as including that, and to really learn more about myself and to be able to share that with others has been such a beautiful place. And we've been building in Port Moody and this community here for the last almost a year. So coming into a pandemic of opening up a martial arts school of close contact was a very a lot of people kind of were wondering what we were doing, but we had our vision. And
Yeah.
my husband and I have really loved building it here and being such a beautiful part of that community.
Oh, that's amazing. Wow. Wow. And so some of the areas of therapy that you like to work in, you said disordered eating. What does that mean for our listeners? What they might have heard of an eating disorder like anorexia, bulimia, those sort of things. But can you explain what is disordered eating?
Yeah, absolutely. There's quite a spectrum when it comes into that space. And I always find it's a really interesting distinction when you can have an eating disorder and have more of that diagnosis and that pathological side of it. But with, disordered eating, there's such a spectrum of patterns that a lot of people end up touching upon and not even realizing it, with these different habits that we can get into, these thought processes, restriction, these rules that we get
Right.
around food
Yeah.
that has been brought into us in so many levels that can really just come out in different ways. And so it's looking at that spectrum of, how you can connect, noticing where that is. So it's just a really broad range of just having kind of just a really complicated sometimes relationship with food. And it's just such an interesting thing because it is a necessity for life. We have
Right.
to eat. So it's such a
Right.
conflicting space to be in, where we sometimes have these struggles with trying to look a certain way, be a certain way, control the things. And it's one of these base core instincts at the same time. So it really can breed a lot of very interesting conversations and challenges that we can have.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. It's something that we all need. We all need food. It's not like we can just avoid it. Hey, this is triggering me. I'm just not going to eat for the rest of my life or look at it or
Mhm.
smell it or be around it. What are some examples or some, kind of common areas that disordered eating may show up with the people that you walk with and support?
Yeah, so I find that it's a very interesting conversation that I work with individuals. And even if it isn't the thing that we touch upon, it is, one of those things that you go through, like, how are you sleeping? What is your, body movement like? And how is your eating? And these are basic conversations. And so a lot of people will notice that you end up getting so focused on your time. So, for example, if you're very busy, that's the first thing a lot of times to go is our eating patterns, and we'll push it, where it's like, oh, I don't have time to grab food, or I don't have time to do this, or I don't, and you just start to really shift the way that we look at food and what we're using as fueling for our bodies. And so there's this kind of idea between those two spaces. And often when we get into being very anxious, or when we're looking for areas that seem out of control in our lives, that is one place that we'll come back to is, okay, well, I'm going to start to change this. I'm going to restrict my meals. I'm going to have less calories. I'm going to count. And we just start to find this way that we oftentimes will move into food as being some way of trying to find a sense of control in our lives when we don't
Right.
have control in some other areas,
Right. That is
or
such a
perceived.
great point. Yeah. Yeah. I often see that when I work with people. And I think I've absolutely experienced that in my life as well, is
Mhm.
when I'm feeling out of control. Here's a way I can make this pseudo sense of control or put some sense of control in my life, whether it's through exercise, again, as a previous, elite level athlete and going through all the weight or BMI or all the testing. There's a lot of that really, really prevalent of the restricting or the over exercising, the obsessiveness almost about it. And that is just draining. And often I can see that coming out in my life when I'm feeling out of control. that, oh, here's something I can control. And it's that fine line. And I think a lot of work of making exercise really healthy and a release, which it is now for me. But in that journey of that's a big one, of that restriction of what I'm eating. And especially in our culture, it's like, here's the newest thing that's good for you, go vegan or keto, or, like there's kind of a lot of messages out there. And that can be overwhelming just in and of itself. Say you want to be healthy, especially on the West Coast where we are in British Columbia. Like people want to be healthy. They're outside, they want to move, they want to exercise, they want to be active. It's just that lifestyle. And so even within that, I see it with people who strive for just a healthy, active lifestyle of what constitutes that, what's that good relationship. So when someone comes in to see you, how do you kind of identify, maybe they don't even know, hey, I'm coming in with disordered eating today. How do you start to ask those good questions like you did of, what's your sleep like? What's your eating like? How do you move your body? How do you move into that to kind of, what are some signs that may show you, hey, there's some disordered eating or a tense relationship with food going on here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great segue into is health, the word. Everyone defines that differently, and that's something that I notice as a way that when I'm speaking with somebody that they'll use that language, being like, I just want to be healthy, or I'm doing this to be healthy. It's like, what does healthy mean to you? Because there's such a different way of looking at it. And sometimes when you actually sit down and ask that question, you're like, well, wait, what does that mean to me? And it's like, eating this or moving my body a certain way. And then it kind of is a really great question and a place to start at as to what that definition for themselves is and how you can start to see from that moment of how they define it, what things they're looking for to come into that space of what healthy is. And then what that term can be, how they're achieving it, and how sometimes those patterns can come in where it's like, is that what health means? Is it about what you look like? Is it about how you feel? Is it about what you're seeing in other people? Is it what you've heard it's supposed to be? All the should start coming out into this place where it's like, yeah, well, healthy is looking a certain way, being able to do this, being able to have all these precursors that we can start to get into this place that people will start to spout off when you're like, but what does that mean to you? Or how do you achieve that? And sometimes we don't even realize that there's a big disconnect between those things. And so that's kind of a place where we can start to build that conversation around, what does that look like to you? And just some of the languaging is so important about, how that connection can really happen. And we will then in turn look into this a compassionate place. Self-compassion is such a huge part of that connection.
And when you say self-compassion, because that is such a powerful tool and strategy, and sometimes someone may have heard of that. I love Dr. Neff's work in self-compassion.
Yeah.
What do you do? How do you incorporate self-compassion when working with someone?
Well, it's in those moments of having those conversations when language does come out with the shoulds, or I have to do these things, and this harsh kind of tone where we start to speak to ourselves. When you just take that pause and start to notice, what would you can ask them, what would you say to a friend, or is that how you would speak to somebody else or to a child? And when you start to notice the way that we speak to each other, sometimes being compassionate to ourselves is hard. It's like, I can give that compassion to you, no problem. Like, I would never speak to you that way. Right. But with me, it's different. We have this idea that this internal dialogue of this harshness that we can have. And so it's sometimes looking at it from how to talk to somebody else and being able to start to shift through that lens and recognize how we have to look at our language and have that little bit of softness. Or is it okay to just be a little bit backed off? Or is it okay to just have a little bit of softness in that language? And it's just step-by-step process. It's not like flipping that switch on, which can be so scary. And so sometimes, looking at ourselves can be a bit challenging. So it's by looking at another person and slowly starting to bring it back towards ourselves.
Right. So what would that look like? Like, what's an example of that? To just even go a little softer?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's sitting in some of the language of, I tried, the best that I can today, or my body just needs to have a rest. It's like, I feel like I'm pushing because I'm so tired. I'm doing all these things. I have all this information, all these different things I'm doing today, all this to-do list. And then just like, well, all of these things coming together. can we just take a step back and just realize I can't do it all? Would anybody else be able to do it all? It's okay if I wait till tomorrow. And just starting to soften some of the language of, okay, noticing, sitting with it. Oftentimes, even placing your hands on your body can be a helpful
Mm,
place, and breathing. And like, what am I noticing right now when that comes up? So when I get into that space of all those to-dos, all those shoulds, all those
right.
places, sometimes that compassion is just a gentle touch and just a reminder and a breath. Like just taking whatever the breath looks like to you today. There's no guidance of it being a square or controlled. It's like just a breath. It could be shallow, and just taking a pause and then moving into, okay, how are some ways to kind of get into that next space. So it's those simple small steps where it's just noticing, practicing that, noticing that awareness. And I'm noticing I'm having this feeling, or I'm noticing this sensation.
Yeah, that brings such a mind body connection, just noticing. And especially in our culture where it says go, 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 or those shoulds in our head of the to-do list, and the time crunch, like you said, that can be a trigger too for restricting or any of these types of more intrusive type thoughts. Um, wow, just to pause and notice and to put that grounding pressure on your body of a hand and a deep breath. That's so powerful.
Yeah, and that's something that, we can try to think of all those different ways of connecting and that internal resource that we have within ourselves. And that pause is so important. And we can do that. We can go to the bathroom and do that, or we're in the car or at our desk. We can
Right.
just take that breath and just gently placing, the hands on ourselves and just noticing what does that feel like on the outside, that this tactile sensation, bringing into those moments, bringing into that space, bringing into the body. And that's how we slowly come into the body of that space and that comfort. Because when we start to notice what's going on, we get so connected up here. We're in our heads. We get so disconnected from what's going on below the neck in so many ways, which is really that space that so much information is in there. And so sometimes just placing our hands in that moment, we do that to children. We like rub the back, when they're like, it's
Right.
like, can we soothe ourselves that way?
Right. Yeah. Oh, I love that. So then what is the correlation? Because as you're describing a lot of this, the shoulds, I see anxiety style thinking there too,
Mm-hmm.
more those negative style thinking, disordered eating or restriction, adding self-compassion and grounding into that practice of just noticing, calming down. I'm doing the best I can. My body really needed a rest today, and I'm choosing to listen to that. My body, I will choose to rest. That power of choice. How is that all interconnected to body image? Because that is
Mm-hmm.
probably a big one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is getting into that space where, our body image is that external perception of how we're looking. It's how we are seen by others. So it's already coming from an outside lens. And so shifting to that knowledge and recognizing, like, again, how am I feeling from the inside? And so by starting with, the hands on the body, it's like the outside, but connecting to that inside space. And so, noticing how we're feeling, we were speaking earlier, Amit and I, about, words and feeling words. And so that is such a great place to start of like, what the word am I feeling right now? Be like, sometimes we just don't have that language. And so looking in, what are the sensations that I'm feeling? I'm noticing that there's a tingling in my abdomen, or I'm
Mm,
noticing my breath, it feels tight around my heart, or that there's like this lump in my throat, or I feel this heaviness in my shoulders. And what are those sensations? And getting into that space of, okay, that's what my body is feeling. So what will help with that sensation? It's like, maybe it's just moving. Like maybe I just need to
mm,
move my
yeah.
body a little bit. It's like, okay, like let's get that movement out, move that sensation, and starting to notice, what am I feeling on that inside space? And so with that mind body connection, we start to cultivate more of the knowledge about what's going on the inside, which can shift into that embodied space and that sense of embodiment. and then shifting in that noting of, okay, what that body image in that way on the outside, is that what I think of myself, or is that what I've been told? Or is that what somebody else is telling me? Or is that this perception that I actually, in the trueness of me, what do I need, or what do I want? Or how can I move forward from this place, from feeling like I can stand tall?
Oh, I love that. Just noticing it in your body and responding, like
Mm-hmm.
moving, just a slight movement can do that. What if it's difficult to decipher? Is that my voice? Is that somebody else's? Is that the cultural pressure or what I think it should be? How do you
Mm-hmm.
help people decipher that?
Yeah, and that's one of those things that can take some practice, because that voice
Right.
has been so loud, right? We're
Right.
in there.
So ingrained.
It's so ingrained. Yeah. There's some beautiful ways to be able to do that. And a lot of it is just starting to notice in that space of that, when we start to notice these same themes or the same language coming up of, okay, you're saying the word should a lot. So when
Mhm.
we start to use shoulds in that language, it's like, do you think you should do that? Where is the shoulds? A lot of times when we have that language, it's not necessarily what we believe in our core self. It's sometimes another,
Mm.
it can be a good, like, note, like a little bit of a little bell being like, wait,
Right.
should is interesting. It's an interesting word. Where is this should coming from? And then if there's possible in that space of that voice, it's like, that voice, can you pull it out? Can you externalize it? This is when art therapy can be so beautiful of,
Mm.
can you draw it? Can you put it on paper and have conversations in that space? Being able to have a different way of dialoguing with it, because we can have these different parts of us that experience and show different things, but it's like, it's still in there, it's still a part of that space. But like, is this what you really want, or is this what you feel is actually in that moment that's right for you, or is this something that's been placed upon you?
Mm.
Is this just teasing some of those things slightly apart? It's not necessarily pulling, but sometimes it's just those, we get so knit that it's just pulling a little bit of teasing to get that space, and
Oh, I
just starting to
like
slowly
that.
take up space.
I like that image. Yeah, because pulling, I love that perspective. I love IFS, or internal family
Yes.
systems. It's a approach to therapy, basically, that we have these different parts of ourselves.
Mhm.
And when you said we could pull those parts out, that sounds harsh. That sounds like a lot. But just
Yeah.
teasing, that sounds so gentle. Like, let's make some
Mhm.
space here to look at it and see, where did this first serve a purpose? This protector part of me that comes out, or the defender part of me, or whatever. And then let's notice it, let's acknowledge it. Because every time that you've spoken so far, what's come out to me is, it has not been, judging your thoughts whatsoever, or your body, or I can't believe I'm feeling this, or I shouldn't be feeling. It's just noticing. It's non-judgmental awareness to it, which is so
Mhm.
crucial in self-compassion. But it's beautiful, like just how you thematically put that in every way that you talk about anything that we've talked about, even so far, halfway into the
Mhm.
podcast. It's been so just non-judgmental awareness to it, of where you're feeling it in your body, how you're responding, even those thoughts that might be more should, like, it's just awareness of it. And I love
Mhm.
that premise of art therapy, to get out of your own head. Again, it's kind of this, that teasing or pulling apart, to look at it in a different way. And what does that look like? What does art therapy that you utilize, what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many beautiful ways of coming into that space. And I love, the continuing of it from, the different parts of ourselves and the protector and all these different roles that we play. They've all served a purpose, and they've gotten us to where we are today. They've helped to get us to this moment. And so there is that space of honoring them and recognizing that there is some place that they might need. And so, with art therapy, there's, so many different ways to be able to connect with that. Because sometimes it's finding the words, like, I don't know what that voice is, but it's like, okay, well, let's just, using the colors in front of you, like, what color is it? It doesn't have to be as extreme of like painting a landscape. It's like, what color does that voice or that feeling sound like, or that sensation? If you were to, make a mark on the page for it, what would that look like? If you were to, give it a name, what would it be? What are some of the things that it needs to incorporate into it, and using some of the materials that are in front of you, like adding that into the space, drawing it out. What movement does it have? If you like add in your body into it as you're drawing, like what does that feel like? Does that connect with it differently? And so it's using different sensations and a different form of language to connect in with you without words, language without words, language through art, language through the body, and giving this different way of connecting and understanding and just opening up. And there's so many, ways to delve into that, and coming into this idea as well of that self-compassion can come this, inner caregiver or inner nurturer or your inner cheerleader. There's different ways that we might connect with it. And I always think how important like language is, that we can identify with this part of us. And so it's not just necessarily about pulling and teasing other things apart. It's also about building this other part of ourselves. And, what are some of the ways to be able to do that? Is there a way to be able to put it on paper that you can then in turn take it home and put it on your wall and look at this inner caregiver, this inner person to help to build and support and nourish yourself, and put it up, being able to look at it, visualize it, and just continuing to really cultivate that side of yourself.
Wow. So what would that look like? I mean, let's say someone comes to you, and how do you know if, they would be a good fit for art therapy? Like if that would be a good fit? Because I can imagine not everybody is, but how could you gently get there to recognize, oh, maybe we could try this? And what would those practical examples, I guess, or strategies look like of what you would draw, what sometimes the common things are that they describe, what colors they are they often red? And I know everybody's different, but just an example for us to conceptualize this.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I had said in that space before, like sometimes it's as simple as picking out, there's markers that are in front of you, which is a familiar tool that we've had, when we were children, or crayons, like using some of the familiar things if it's a really um, new to you, where because art can be very challenging, because we often move into that grade 7 area where it's taken away from being a core subject and it's a choice, and so we stop to learn to like just express ourselves in that way. So it's finding those familiar things that were a little bit less intimidating. And so what does that piece look like? What does it feel like in the hand? So a lot of stuff isn't necessarily about what goes onto the page or what it looks like. Sometimes it's just about the experience of reconnecting with those
Right.
materials in front of you. And so, if you were to make a mark on the page, that's a simple way of starting. And it could be a line, or what would a gesture be that would describe that? And then continuing to grow upon it. One of my favorite things I love to do is to draw your breath. And it's just sitting for a few moments with something in your hand, and grabbing a breath and just breathing, and with your eyes closed for like a minute, just guiding through the inhale and exhale. What does that look like?
Oh, I
And just
like that.
allowing that movement, feeling it in your body,
Wow.
and then looking at it after, and what do you see here, in the sense of like, can you embellish it? What colors do you want to add to it? And just making it less about what the outcome is, but about the experience of what you're feeling. What is that
Getting it out.
sensation like?
Yeah.
It can be a very interesting way of connecting to space, and to some feelings that that we often are not permitted to live out in everyday life, like anger or sadness. That they're in those moments of being able to just have this container of being able to just use those in big way. Like anger could be all sorts of things, and just giving it a place that feels okay to try things out.
Right. Wow. What are some for anger and sadness? Because obviously those are big core emotions. They're emotions that we
Mhm.
all experience. What are some ways people typically describe them? Like if it's, red and prickly for anger, or black and heavy for sadness, what do you often see?
Mhm. Color it is very subjective. It is a very, interesting and personal one, where we would think that sometimes, black or red would be in these spaces because that's something that we, hear a lot or we talk a lot about, which does come up for sure. But people have these different sensations where it's like, that's the beauty of it, where it's like, yeah, today anger for me is blue because it's kind of sad as well. I'm actually sad that I'm angry, so there's sometimes these mixed emotions, or, that's just an example of it without placing any ideas upon people's perceptions of or interpretations of their colors of their experiences, or really being able to press really hard with a marker and like getting it all out and using those movements, or it's a circle or a blob. As much as it's wanting to be able to share the commonalities with it, it's so vast in that space. And being able to go into those motions and those movements, being able to just have that moment of just being okay to express some of those emotions. Another beautiful one is even just like crumpling up that paper. What does that sound like after you've done it? What does that feel like? Like opening and closing it, maybe ripping it slowly, ripping it fast. Just allowing these release in a way that feels like it's a way that you're able to express yourself, because we often think anger could be so destructive and hurtful to somebody else, but it still has a valid feeling to exist. So how is a way of allowing it to come out without it being consuming, or without it being shamed, or without shutting it down, that feels like you're able to allow its space to exist so that it can get a little bit softer.
How do you get trained to work in art therapy? Because not every therapist does this. Like this is really beautiful and unique. How do you go about doing that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I am I had a double designation of my master's in counseling psychology and art therapy.
Wow.
So it is art therapy is a full designation. So I have like a dual degree in that. But it is a separate, distinct, different certification. And there's different places around North America, and around the world that you can get the certifications. There's a number of locations in BC, for example, that do have that. But it is a very specific training where you learn how to be in the space with somebody while they're sharing their feelings, and while they're drawing them out or painting them out, or using different ways of being able to express yourself non-verbally. Being in those moments of what materials can really help to elicit certain feelings, what ones are really about helping to feel more controlled, what are some ways of feeling, being able to expand a little bit more. You use a bit more visualization of things. Is it about, okay, imagine something if you're coming into that space, or do you need something more specific, like here is a circle, draw how you're feeling inside the circle using all whatever materials are in here. And maybe they'll just draw a little star, and it's like, that's it, whatever it is in that moment. It's like really just being able to roll with those places, with what the person in front of you needs and is offering in that moment, being very present. And in turn, you end up doing art with them as well. So it's not just that you're watching them and writing it down, which can feel scary too. It's like, I'm going to be just, doodling beside you as well. And sometimes it is just doodling. There's some beautiful ways of connecting and flowing. And it's not about being an artist. There are some ways of using art in therapy, as the ways that we've discussed, or art as therapy, which can be very different, which is, when you go to a pottery class, when you're using this, potentially as a way to help you, or taking a painting class as a release of emotions, or as a release of self-care, being in those spaces as well. So there's such a spectrum of ways of connecting in a different format.
So when people seek you out, do they typically want art to be involved, or do they know? How do you introduce that? What does that look like?
Absolutely. I find that because I have that space of, having counseling and art therapy, that you get people that are interested in art therapy, but they also want to talk, because they want to be able to get these things off, formulate cognitively their words, and being able to express that. And then with the somatic side, with like looking into the body, which is another big piece, which we've talked about without actually using those words in a lot of way, of that somatic piece, which is another certification. I have those three. It's really just using all of those in those spaces. So sometimes it's, very simply using, we'll come into a session and, we'll maybe do a little bit of grounding and meditation, doing a little bit of art and a little bit of talking about it. And, they're being able to interweave for what the individual person wants. Some people want to do just art. And so it's just coming into that space of what you can offer for the person and what that individual wants, what they need that day, what they want more of. And with that connection coming into that space can be so beautiful, and interweaving it all in such a holistic way.
Wow, that's beautiful. I'd love to circle back to body image because I think that's such a big one.
Absolutely.
I see so much of that, and I think our culture speaks very loudly of that. Could you give an example of what someone would come into you with struggling with body image, what that looks like, and then what you do, kind of what a therapy process with you would look like to help someone working through body image issues?
Absolutely. If there's some really great ways, if you're looking for like that structure within yourself, like if you need a structured program or like you want like homework, it really depends on the individual. But it is something that we often start at with just that awareness, that knowing, that connection. And then from there, moving into, if you're looking for that homework, if you're looking for something to continue to do, because it is about continuing to find that connection. I'm also a part of this group out of the States, and it's the Big Hearted Embodiment provider. And so there's a beautiful way of going through these resources together, and we can work on, what was your body story? When was the first time as a child that you can think of that you remember recognizing I have a body, or that somebody commented on your body, and kind of coming into that space and just thinking from that language and just telling the story of your body from start to end, writing it out and just journaling about that and sharing it together, and being able to talk about those spaces and noticing when things changed. Because as children, we often have this free place, but there's this moment we can often distinctly notice where, you're right, I remember that time that somebody said something, or that I noticed this, or I noticed somebody looking, or I heard somebody say something about somebody else. And we can start to pinpoint some of those stories and some of those areas where we notice those changes. And so it's coming into that knowledge and recognizing where they are, and then starting to build that intuitive self-care, intuitive practice. What do I need? What does my body need? And looking at that intuitive self-care, self-practice, and coming into this next space. And so it's looking at that side from, where it began, what's the story, and getting it fully out, and just really understanding who you are from the body perspective, and being able to then shift and then, okay, where does this come from here? How do I reconnect with what my needs are? Or there's some words like satisfied. How do I know when I'm satisfied? How do I know when I'm full? How do I practicing into that intuitive space, and then continuing to build on it from there? And that self-esteem can start to come into that play as well, with that self-compassion, and really getting into that moment of how to build into ourselves and coming into that next space.
I love that. Wow, I'm satisfied. It's like relearning and giving yourself permission to say those types of, yeah, powerful words, and hearing the cues of your body.
Yeah, we've get so disconnected from it, where it's like, I'm full. It's like, okay, well, what does that feel like? And satisfied is a word that we don't often even use in our language, that in our day to day, being like, that was satisfying. How do you know? Like, when was the last time you felt satisfied with something? And it doesn't have to be with food, it could be with an activity, or with an experience, or with a movement. And I often like to shift as well with, like, exercise is important, but it's like maybe just moving the body. It doesn't have to be into like all these in this moments of moving the body. I'm just going to go for a walk to move my body, as opposed to a walk to get exercise. That language shift and the understanding of how you're doing it for the inside part of you, then reflect on the outside part of you.
So, what would that look like? Because often with body image, I hear, I walk past the mirror and I can't even look at myself, or I don't like the way this part of me looks, or all of me. How do you walk with someone through that? What are some things that you use there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a tough experience, right? When you're going in and looking at yourself from that space and not being able to say look kindly upon yourself. And it is just being in that moment of, if it's too much to look in the mirror in that space, it's like taking your time, and it's not about having to do anything. Everyone has their own timeline for doing things. And in tune, when you start to notice what's going on inside and that connection, and starting to build on those internal resources, it starts to build on the outside. And so by going to that simple basic step and taking those, really coming to that beginning place of awareness, knowing, connecting, and moving forward, it starts to build, that you're able to start to look forward at those things. And maybe you're coming into that space of, I'm only going to look in the mirror at this time, to be able to kind of start to build into that space and to look myself in the eyes. What is it like to just look myself in the eyes and not necessarily looking at my full body? Can I get to that space? And it's just, this is obviously after some time, that coming into that could be a really big step of somebody that's going into that moment. But that's kind of where you kind of start to build and progress, and coming into more of a connection that way. And a lot of times we can have this body positive movement has been so beautiful, but body positive is also very outward and really getting into that image space too. And sometimes it's just body neutral. That's like, I have a body. It's like, my body, I have this body. This body is a part of me. It gets me from A to B. It's served me by waking up in the morning. It nourishes me by processing the food that's there. And so it's starting to appreciate it from a different level from the inside, and then slowly starting to build to having a bit more of that experience from the outside.
Mm. Yeah. Wow. So it's a journey. That's
Yeah,
very much what I'm hearing you say.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough, and because when you get into that, like that next space, and it's just finding that confidence in that moment of what it is to be you. And everyone's is different. Everyone's journey is different, and it shifts and ebbs and flows, especially as we age, we go through life changes, different roles we play, from like being single to being, child, single, married, maybe a mother or father, coming into these different roles that we can play. It's so different how our body image might shift and adjust. And so it's still coming back from that place of gently, just slowly walking back. So you're walking alongside yourself.
Yes. Oh, it's so true. Because as an athlete to, retiring, my body looked differently. And then being a mom, being pregnant 4 times, like your body changes a lot. And it was a lot of intentional, like I'm not perfect at it by any means, but I love those practices. I'm actually going to take some of those with me because it's like that appreciation of, wow, my body's created for this. I remember being very nervous for labor and delivery, and just trying to hold on to mantras like that of, my body's created for this. I'm going to listen to my body. I'm going to appreciate how my body can grow life. Like that's amazing. Or, nursing, sustain life. And it's like the shift in a time where your body is not necessarily your own, or you feel out of control in some senses, of bringing appreciation into it. And that was really big for me. And again, I'm not perfect at it by any means. It's a constant thing that I want to try to grow in and learn in. But I think for most of us, like not just women too, a lot of people think, oh, body image, that's a women's issue. But it's a human issue, if we're really honest. And so I just think it's so encouraging to hear these. There's a lot of hope. That's kind of what I'm getting out of today. There's a lot of hope. There's different types of self-compassion and grounding, and putting a hand on your body and taking just a deep breath and bringing awareness. There's some kind self-talk. There's some different types of therapy like IFS or somatic, which is that very physical mind-body connection type approach. There's art therapy. There's talk therapy. There's movement therapy. There's a lot of hope for what your body and what you need. And that's really encouraging, because this is a human issue that most of us deal with to some extent. And to have appreciation and a healthy relationship with our body. So I'd love to kind of end on that. What would be some tips I guess that you could leave us with to have a healthy body image or just a healthy relationship with our bodies.
Mm-hmm. And I love that the story of your journey there of going through like your labor and motherhood in that space and those mantras that you came up with. Like, yeah, it's not easy. And this the whole, as it is, it's a journey. Perfection is not necessarily in that space or that goal. It's so, but being in that moment of this, my body is meant to do this. This is a natural change. These are in these spaces.
Oh yeah,
Noticing
someone
those
else told
roles.
me
Yeah.
that. I did not come up with it, nor did I
Oh,
believe it at first. It was a
like I'm just
lot of repetition.
well, it's building those new pathways, right? Our thoughts
Yes.
can go so quickly to those rote ones that we have like on playing on the back end. So it's noticing what is that, what is the background noise? What is the background music of my thoughts about my body, about body image? Like, what do I always hear? And it's just noticing what that is. It's like, okay, that's just my noticing. And without thinking of like, I'm just going to change it or I'm going to get rid of it, you're coming with that harsh space of trying to move into that moment. So yeah, noticing. And so it's just, what is that background noise? And it's like, what does health mean to me? It's like, okay, what are some ways that I can bring compassionate into that moment? As I'm a mom of four, that I probably don't have the same amount of time to just focus on my body and my thoughts and in that space together in those moments
But I
of just
have a lot of crayons, a lot of markers.
yeah, well, it's something, those beautiful spaces. Yeah, that's being like, what am I feeling like today? What color do I feel like today? And that could be adding, if you have a journaling practice in place already, can you add that to it? What color do I feel like today? What does that color mean to me? And being maybe writing in that color and seeing what that feels like. Is there some ways of adding these things in, of that connection to the body, of connecting in a different way? If I were to envision myself, like, is there a metaphor for what I'm feeling today? I feel like a spring flower blooming, or I feel like I'm wilting, like coming into that space. Like, what am I noticing? Okay, well, what do I need more of? I need more water. I'm wilting. I need more water today. It's like, okay, because if we start to notice and become aware of those things, we'll actually be able to fuel and nourish ourselves with the things our body needs. As opposed, if we're not in that connection, then things can swirl down and we're like, I'm just really happy or I'm angry, or all these different thoughts can come in and these different ways that we're trying to figure it out, when it's like, well, maybe I'm just really tired. I have 4 kids and we've had tournaments all weekend, or all these different things going on, that yeah, of course I'm going to be tired, and that's okay. Other people would be tired too if they had all these things going on. And coming into that space of, okay, and today, my body got me out of bed. My body made food for myself. We made food for our family. We were able to get to this space. Maybe it could have been different, but I was still able to do it. And I love my body for being able to do what it was meant to do. And if love is not the word that is coming into that moment for you, it's like, I appreciate it. I appreciate what you've done. I know that we're going through a different space. And if there's any things that are in there that you notice, I mean, one thing to be able to shift into is if you follow social media, it's like, start to follow people that inspire looking at yourselves differently. When you're looking at accounts, does it make me feel like, oh, I should do, or I don't like, or start to notice if that voice starts to come louder, and unfollow them. You can always follow them back, if that's in that space, and having those moments of, what is going to fill me up and make me feel more fulfilled and connect to me on the inside when I take that breath. And if anything, if you have that chance, connect to yourself, take a breath,
Yeah,
take a
connect
pause.
to your breath. I love that phrase, connect to your breath. Well, speaking of social media, Bethany, and where we can find you, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my practice is called Soul Flow Therapy. And so that is my Instagram name. And it's also my website. So www.soulflowtherapy.com. So flow, SOULFLOW. Soul Flow
Awesome.
Therapy.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that. And even when we are doing that, as you're describing, take a breath and on the exhale, and how you work with it, utilizing art, and you draw that breath, like drawing your breath. And oh, what color would it be? Like just even in my mind when I was doing that and with my hand and my breath tracing it, I just came like with light blue. And I was like, oh, that's very calm and, light and airy. It just was beautiful. So I really liked that practice. So there's a strategy. If you guys want to try, draw your breath. I loved that hand on your heart or just on your body of bringing awareness, connecting to your breath. Do you have any resources that you like to recommend, like on any of these topics, self-compassion, body image, disordered eating, learning more about art therapy or art in therapy?
No, absolutely. There's some really beautiful resources that are out there. Kristen Neff is another one that we talked about a number of times. I know you've spoken about her in other podcasts. There's even a really great self-compassion quiz that's on there that you can really notice and check out and just see where you're at in those spaces. There's Big-Hearted Embodiment with Elizabeth Scott. That is a training that I've done, and it's such a beautiful connection. It's also facilitated with the Be Body Positive, and it's just shifting that language from that place of empowerment, from that place of growth, from that place of connection. A book that I'm currently reading that I'm really loving is, I even wrote it down. So it's the book with The Wisdom of the Body, and the author is Hilary Mcbride, and
I
she's
love
actually.
Hilary Mcbride.
Have you read that book?
I haven't finished it almost, but I love her podcast. I love her work. Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah, I'm really connecting with that book right now. There's a lot of beautiful insights and just little things in there that I really have loved. And if you're for some information on debunking some like diet myths or coming into that space, there's a really interesting podcast called The Maintenance Phase, which I quite enjoy, and find that there's a lot of really great insights and information in there. So I recommend that as well.
Oh, that's great. I utilize the body image workbook quite a bit with clients. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't. I'm gonna write it down. The body.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm always about resources because I just think as, we're so honored we get to spend, 50 to 60 minutes with someone, but then the majority of their life, they're out there living 99% without us. And so to empower them and give great resources and different types of resources speak to different people or just to our listeners. So I just appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom and expertise in these areas, sharing just your heart. You can just tell how calm and just what a presence you bring in with people. And I just really want to thank you for your time and coming on today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor, and I really love this experience. And having this conversation with you is just a beautiful and natural way to go. We could talk forever. Keep going.
Oh, well, thank you, Bethany. Thank you so much.